March 1945, Western Germany. The war was nearly over, everyone knew it. The Germans were retreating, the Allies were pushing east, towns fell one after another. But the fighting had not stopped. Men still died. Mines still exploded. Snipers still waited in the rubble. You could not let your guard down, not for a second. Staff Sergeant William Harper led a squad of American infantry through a bombed-out village near the Rhine River. The houses were shattered, roofs collapsed, walls blown open. The streets were covered in rubble, broken glass, twisted metal. Smoke rose from a few buildings. The smell of cordite and ash hung in the cold air. Harper was from Ohio, 24 years old but looked older. War did that. He had fought through France and Belgium, now deep into Germany itself. He had seen friends die, watched boys become old men in days. Harper did not talk much anymore. He just walked, rifle ready, eyes scanning for danger. The squad moved slowly, checking every building, every corner, every shadow. German soldiers sometimes waited until you passed, then shot you in the back. Sometimes they booby-trapped doors. You had to be careful, always careful. At the edge of the village, near a collapsed barn, one of the men stopped. "Sarge," he called, "you better see this." Harper walked over. The man was pointing behind the barn. Harper raised his rifle and moved forward, then he saw it. A German tank. A Panther. One of the best tanks the Germans had, bigger than a Sherman, better armor, better gun, the kind of tank that could knock out 3 or 4 American tanks before going down. But this one was not moving. It sat silent in a shallow ditch, half hidden by trees and debris. The long gun barrel pointed at nothing. The tracks were intact, no visible damage. It looked like it could start up and drive away at any moment. "Careful," Harper said. "Could be a trap." The men spread out, rifles aimed at the tank. They waited. Nothing moved, no sound, no sign of life. Harper signaled 2 men forward. They moved slowly, step by step, watching for wires, for mines, for anything. They reached the tank, still nothing. "It's empty, Sarge," one of them called. Harper moved up. The others followed. They surrounded the tank, weapons ready. Up close, the Panther was massive. The hull towered over them. The armor was thick, sloped, painted in camouflage green and brown. The German cross was still visible on the turret. No bullet holes, no shell impacts. It looked almost new. "Why would they leave it?" one of the men asked. "Out of fuel, maybe," Harper said. "Or broke down. Germans are running out of everything." They climbed onto the tank. The hatches were closed but not locked. Harper grabbed the commander's hatch and pulled. It opened with a metallic groan. Cold air rushed out. Harper shined his flashlight inside. The interior was dark, cramped, full of equipment and controls. But no crew, no bodies. "Clear," he called. One by one, the men climbed down into the tank. It was tight inside, barely enough room to move. The smell of oil and sweat and old cigarettes filled the space. The driver's seat was empty. The gunner's position was empty. The loader's station was empty. But the tank itself was intact. The engine was there. The ammunition was there. The radio was there. And then they saw something else. Something that made them stop. On the floor, near the driver's seat, was a small leather bag. Harper picked it up. It was heavy. He opened it. Inside were personal items, letters, photographs, a small Bible, a watch, a wedding ring. The belongings of the crew. One of the men picked up the letters. They were in German, but you did not need to speak German to understand what they were. Letters from home. Letters from a wife, a mother, a child. The handwriting was careful, neat. The paper was worn from being read over and over. Harper looked at the photographs. One showed a young man in a German uniform standing with a woman and 2 small children. He was smiling. The woman was smiling. The children were smiling. It could have been any family, any soldier, any war. Another photograph showed the same man with his tank crew. 5 men standing in front of a Panther, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. They looked young, happy, proud, like they thought they were invincible. "Jesus," one of the Americans said softly. Harper kept looking through the bag. There was a small notebook. He opened it. The pages were filled with writing, dates, places, names. It was a diary. The tanker had been keeping a record of his war. Harper could not read German, but he could read the dates. The diary went back to 1943, 2 years of war. 2 years of fighting, moving, surviving. Near the back of the notebook, the handwriting became more hurried, less neat. The entries were shorter. You could feel the exhaustion in the words, even if you could not read them. The last entry was dated just 2 days ago. One of the soldiers found a small metal box tucked behind the gunner's seat. He opened it. Inside were rations, German military rations, chocolate, hard biscuits, a can of meat. The crew had left their food behind. They left in a hurry, Harper said. Or they're coming back, another man said nervously. Harper shook his head. No, they're gone. They're not coming back. But why? Why would a tank crew abandon a perfectly good tank? Why leave their personal belongings, their letters, their photos? Why leave everything? Harper climbed back out of the tank. He looked around the area. That was when he noticed the tracks, boot prints in the mud leading away from the tank, heading west, deeper into Germany. The crew had walked away on foot. It did not make sense. A Panther was worth more than gold to the German army. You did not just abandon one, unless you had no choice, unless the war was over and you knew it, unless you just wanted to go home. Harper thought about the photographs, the young man with his family, his children. Somewhere in Germany, a woman and 2 kids were waiting for that man to come home. Maybe he made it. Maybe he was walking home right now, or maybe he was dead in a ditch somewhere, killed by artillery or a sniper, or just bad luck. The squad searched the rest of the tank. In the turret, they found more personal items. A harmonica, a small carved wooden horse, probably a toy for one of the children back home, a deck of cards. These men had lived in this tank, fought in this tank, survived in this tank. In the ammunition racks they found shells, armor-piercing rounds, high explosive rounds, enough to fight a battle, but the crew had not fired them. They had just left, walked away, given up. One of the Americans found something else. A small metal flask. He unscrewed the cap and sniffed. Schnapps, German liquor, still half full. He started to take a drink, but Harper stopped him. Leave it, Harper said. It's theirs. The man looked at him confused. They're gone, Sarge, I know, but it's still theirs. They climbed out of the tank. Harper stood there for a moment, looking at the Panther. It was a beautiful machine in a terrible way, powerful, deadly, built to kill. But now it sat silent and empty, abandoned by the men who had trusted their lives to it. What do we do with it? One of the men asked. Leave it, Harper said. It's not going anywhere. Engineers will come get it, or blow it up. Not our problem. But Harper could not stop thinking about the letters, the photographs, the diary. These were not monsters. These were not the faceless enemy. These were men. Soldiers, fathers, sons, just like them. They had families waiting for them. They had lives before the war. They had fears and hopes and dreams. And now they were walking home, if they were lucky, leaving everything behind. Harper reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph of his own, his wife, his little girl. He had not seen them in over a year. He wondered if he looked as tired in his photos as that German tanker did in his. He wondered if his daughter would even recognize him when he got home, if he got home. Let's move out, Harper said. The squad moved on, leaving the Panther behind. They had a war to finish. A war that had already gone on too long, a war that had turned young men into ghosts, but Harper carried the image of that tank with him. The empty seats, the abandoned letters, the photographs of smiling children, it stayed with him for the rest of the war, for the rest of his life. The discovery was not unique. Across Germany in the spring of 1945, American and British troops found hundreds of abandoned German vehicles. Tanks, half-tracks, trucks, artillery pieces. Some were damaged, some were out of fuel, many were perfectly functional. The crews had just walked away. By March 1945, the German army was collapsing. Fuel was running out. Ammunition was scarce. Spare parts were impossible to find. More importantly, German soldiers knew the war was lost. They had known for months. Some kept fighting because they had no choice. Others because they believed in the cause. But many just wanted to survive long enough to go home. Tank crews faced a particular dilemma. A tank without fuel was just a steel coffin. You could not move it. You could not hide it. You could not defend it indefinitely. When the fuel ran out, you had two choices: stay with the tank and be captured, or abandon it and try to make it home on foot. For many German tankers in the final months of the war, the choice was obvious. They took their personal belongings, destroyed any sensitive equipment, and walked away. Some made it home. Others were captured. Some died on the roads, killed by Allied fighters or artillery. The abandoned Panther that Harper's squad found was one of thousands. Each one represented a crew that had given up. Each one was a silent testament to a war that was ending not with a final battle, but with exhaustion and defeat. American intelligence officers studied these abandoned vehicles carefully. They wanted to understand German tank design. They wanted to capture technology. They wanted to learn lessons for future wars. But for the infantry soldiers who found them, the abandoned tanks were something else. They were reminders that the enemy was human, that German soldiers had families, that they wrote letters home, that they carried photographs of their children, that they played cards and drank schnapps and carved wooden toys in quiet moments between battles. Harper's squad moved on that day, leaving the Panther behind. But the memory stayed with Harper. Years later, after the war, he would tell the story to his grandchildren, about the tank they found, about the letters and photographs, about the diary of a German soldier who had survived 2 years of war only to walk away from his tank in the final weeks. His grandchildren would ask what happened to the German tanker. Did he make it home? Did he see his wife and children again? Harper never knew. He hoped so. He hoped that somewhere in Germany, that young man had walked through his front door, hugged his wife, picked up his children, and never talked about the war again. But Harper knew the odds. He knew how many men died in those final weeks. He knew about the refugees clogging the roads, the Allied fighters strafing anything that moved, the artillery fire that fell without warning, the chaos and confusion as Germany collapsed. The German tanker might have made it home, or he might have died a mile from the village where Harper found his tank. There was no way to know. What Harper did know was that finding that tank changed him. Before that day, the enemy had been abstract: Germans, Nazis, the bad guys. After that day, they were something else: men, fathers, sons, people who wanted to go home just as much as he did. The war ended a few weeks later. Germany surrendered in May 1945. Harper survived. He went home to Ohio. He married his sweetheart. He raised his little girl. He tried to forget the war. But he never forgot the Panther. The empty interior, the letters from home, the photograph of the smiling family, the diary with its tired, hurried handwriting, the wooden toy horse carved by a father for a child he might never see again. Decades after the war, historians would study the collapse of the German army in 1945. They would analyze supply shortages and strategic failures. They would count casualties and document battles. They would map the final campaigns. But the real story of Germany's defeat was not in the numbers. It was in the small moments. The tank crews walking away from their vehicles, the soldiers throwing down their rifles, the families hiding in basements, waiting for the end. It was in the letters left behind in an abandoned tank, the photographs of children, the diary entries that ended abruptly, the wooden toy horse that a father had carved but never delivered. These were the things that told the real story, not the story of armies and strategies, but the story of men caught in a war that had gone on too long. Men who had fought and suffered and lost everything. Men who just wanted to go home. Harper understood this. That is why he never forgot the Panther. That is why he told the story to his grandchildren. That is why, Even in his old age, he could close his eyes and see that abandoned tank sitting in the ditch, silent and empty, with all its secrets left behind. The war had ended. The tanks had been left behind. But the memories never faded. They stayed with the men who had fought. They stayed with the families who had waited. They stayed in the photographs and letters and diaries left in abandoned vehicles across a defeated Germany, and they reminded everyone who saw them that war was not about tanks and guns and strategies. It was about people, about families torn apart, about children waiting for fathers who might never come home, about young men who wanted to live, who wanted to survive, who wanted nothing more than to walk away from the war and never look back. That was what Harper found in the Panther. Not military secrets, not valuable intelligence, just the human story of the war. The story that never made it into the history books. The story of ordinary men trying to survive in extraordinary times. And that story, more than any battle or campaign, was what the war was really about.